Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Thank you for joining us. Letting folks get in the room from the waiting room. We appreciate you joining us. My name is Monique Jones. I'm President and CEO of Forefront, and I am happy to be here to help us kick off the Illinois Count Me In 2030, the census. We are so excited is not the word, but sort of excited to be starting this early with Census 2030. So you have a full agenda today, and I appreciate you taking the time to join us. I'll let everyone will of course introduce themselves, but I just want to welcome you in and invite you for a minute to get settled and think about where you are and why we're here. Forefront is excited to host this because we are always fully committed to this work, not just the census work, but the overall civic engagement, making sure that everyone here is prepared for what's to come ahead. We are obviously the right organization to kick this off for a few reasons. We understand what was happening for Census 2020. Times change year over year, but we've learned a lot and we're excited to put those learnings into place as we move forward. Forefront structure, if you are a member, we are structured around a membership of funders, of nonprofit leaders, of allies that work in that space. We also, of course, carry really respectable and good relationships with government officials at every level. And you'll meet, of course, some of our team members, if you don't already know them, who've been engaged in their work. 5 years when I joined Forefront, we were working in the space of racial equity, but we've put that practice into everything that we do, and we are putting that into practice with our public policy programs as well. So the research and the supports that we offer center around making sure that we are inclusive in our work and that you have the opportunity to engage in that. We've already convened. We're a convener, we are a leader, we support public private partnerships and peer networks. So being here with you, having you all connect with each other is, of course, what we want to do. And of course, as I said, Forefront did this in 2020. We'll improve upon what happened, of course, taking in consideration all the learnings and the things that have happened since we did this work back in 2020. And so you'll hear a lot about that today. The team, of course, led by Holly, will move forward and share what's happening, and our panelists will be introduced now. So thank you again for joining us, and I'm going to turn it over to Holly and Charmaine.
Thank you so much, Monique, and welcome everybody. First, I want to start out on a happy note by wishing our teammate with us here, Lacey, a happy birthday. So you can join me in that. What better way to spend your birthday than sharing it with Census Day and April Fool's Day, right? So, but we all love and appreciate Lacey, and I know you do as well. So I'm the Senior Director of Policy and Government Affairs at Forefront, and my peer director, Charmaine, is here with me, and she and I are trying to really integrate this work as Charmaine serves as the Director of Racial Equity Collective. So she'll be chiming in shortly as we move through this program. First, I want to take a minute to introduce our panelists, and then we will kind of start moving through the agenda, which includes a look back on 2020, and then what's changed since then, and then where we're at now and how we're planning to move forward, including the role of state and private sector players as well as local players. So we have a long program this morning. You will get all of the slides, links, and recordings. So feel free to just sit back and relax and breathe and try to take it in, even as we work through some of this news, which can be kind of tough news. And even as we're gathering this morning, there's more tough breaking news and lots of stuff going on in the courts. And so I just want to acknowledge that folks are bringing a lot of that anxiety with us today. So we will also have time at the end for questions and discussion, and feel free to use chat as well as we move through the program for anything you'd like to ask. We'll do our best to pause and take questions as we go. So a quick recap of who will be speaking today in addition to Forefront staff. First, we are so happy to welcome Melina Sanchez. Melina is the funder liaison for the Census Funder Collaborative at the national level. Melina is a former senior program officer at the James Irvine Foundation and where she led census, voter, and civic engagement grant making. And Melina holds an MPA from Harvard Kennedy School, and she navigates life in a wheelchair. And we're so happy to have her here today to talk about what's going on at the national level and how funders can be starting to engage in this moment. Also joining us to make comments are a few Illinois folks that you'll all know and recognize. First, we have Kathy Cortez. Kathy Cortez serves on the League of Women Voters of Illinois Board of Directors and has been the League of Women Voters Illinois Issue Specialist for Fair and Affordable Housing since 2020. She previously served as the Vice President of Issues and Advocacy and chaired both the Issues and Advocacy Committee and the Volunteer Lobby Corps. Kathy serves as a voter registrar in Palatine and has served as local league president and chair of candidate forums. Outside the league, she serves as president of the Board of Housing Opportunity Development Corporation and is active in community advocacy for housing affordability. Also with us this morning is Dr. Sheila Caldwell. Dr. Caldwell was appointed in 2021 as the inaugural Vice President for Anti-Racism, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and Chief Diversity Officer for the Southern Illinois University System. In this role, Sheila coordinates system-wide diversity and equity initiatives and oversees non-discrimination and equal opportunity compliance, as well as leading efforts to advance SIU as an anti-racist organization. Sheila's a Chicago native, where she previously served as Wheaton College's inaugural Chief Intercultural Engagement Officer, where she helped implement key institutional policies, including a diversity commitment statement, inclusive hiring practices, and bias reporting system. Next with us, we have Jose Marco Paredes, who is the Vice President of Civic Engagement, Vice President of Civic Engagement, overseeing Latino policy forums, advocacy and policy work in housing and immigration, as well as the Multicultural Leadership Academy, which brings together African American and Latino leaders. Jose convenes the Illinois Latino Agenda, which is the largest coalition of Latino leaders in Illinois, and leads the forum's Acuerdo network of up to 100 community-based organizations statewide. Also this morning we have Anna Agarot, who is the Managing Director of Strategy at AMPT Chicago. AMPT is advancing nonprofits located in Chicago, where she focuses on strengthening relationships that drive change across the nonprofit ecosystem. Through an anti-racist lens, Anna envisions nonprofits being supported to actively serve and effectively serve their communities and build pathways toward a liberated and loving future. Previously, Anna served as development manager at the Network for College Success, where she developed compelling narratives to mobilize financial support for public high school educators. And last but not least, joining us later in the program, we'll have Senator Graciela Guzman, who represents the 20th District of Illinois, where she served since January 25. Senator Guzman is a longtime community organizer and healthcare advocate, and she previously founded the Chicago Affordable Care Act Consortium and led statewide efforts to expand healthcare access to immigrant communities. Senator Guzman has worked with organizations including the Chicago Teachers Union, Protect Our Care Illinois, and Northwest Mutual Aid. She holds a bachelor's degree in anthropology from Grinnell College, and she's the first Salvadorian to serve in the Illinois General Assembly. Due to scheduling conflicts, she'll be joining us about halfway through the program. So we'll be watching for her and she'll join us as we move through. So with that, we're gonna quickly summarize for folks, just to get us all grounded and on the same page. A reminder about why the census matters and why all of us care about this work and how it connects to everything we do. So on the next slide, you'll see just a recap of the major reasons that census counts impact a lot of what we do in our communities for the long term. So first, the Constitution has implications for the census, where the census is used to set the apportionment of seats in the House. So after the 2020 census, due to Illinois' count, which recorded fewer persons, we lost a seat in the US House. We went from 18 to 17 seats. So the census is traditionally used to determine how the 435 US House seats are apportioned among states with a pro rata distribution based on census counts. Census is also used to draw district lines for both federal and state legislative districts. After the census is complete, that redistricting is normally done in years that end in 1 or 2. And then also census helps allocate billions and billions of federal funding dollars. So just in Illinois, about $88 billion are distributed based on census counts. That impacts everything from Medicaid to housing to transportation and other types of planning dollars. And then finally, planners of all kinds, from transportation to public health, use census data to do their work and allocate resources and plan and anticipate what changes need to be made. So there's all kinds of real world implications for the census data and all kinds of reasons why we need to count everybody as well as possible in our state. So I'm going to share a couple links in chat that speak to this, including one fact sheet that's super helpful around the distribution of federal funding. So as we know, there are certain groups of folks that are harder to count in the census, and some of those are listed here. The hardest group to count is actually children. And then we also have challenges related to immigrants, minorities of, particularly Blacks and Latinos, and folks that live in any type of congregate or shared housing setting, and also rural populations. And there's a variety of reasons for why those groups are difficult to count historically. Everything from distrust of government to lack of internet access to mobility and frequent moves to lack of knowledge about the process itself, and so on. So there's all kinds of reasons why these groups are hard to count, and some of our guests can speak to that. And some of these challenges will certainly be heightened in 2030. So we have a couple resources for you about undercounted populations. I will share that in chat. I see a note about access denied on the first link. I'll investigate that when I'm able to. Thank you for pointing that out. So I want to pause here and ask our friends that have joined us to comment. They're going to comment quickly on how they're looking back at 2020, what they're doing now, and what the unique issues are for each of their stakeholder groups. So I'll pause and see if Kathy is ready to speak, and if so, she'll lead us off, and then we'll hear from the others in the order they're shown on this slide.
I'm here. Thanks, Holly.
Thanks, Kathy. Go ahead.
The League of Women Voters in 2020 did a lot of communication and outreach, as I suspect many of your organizations did as well. I do see a number of you from organizations that are likely going to be addressing things like some of the immigration enforcement interference that's likely to happen with the 2030 census. But looking back, this is one of those that I think requires more outreach to more organizations than we think are customary to our individual nonprofits. For example, one of the things that we'll likely do that we did not do for the 2020 effort, we did a voter registration push, for example, the Greater Chicago Food Depository, and kind of partnered with them to use their facilities to do outreach to underserved underserved individuals who we really wanted to benefit from having their voice heard. And I think that groups like that we can partner with will help us reach those in the community that we do not otherwise have routine access to through our social media or through our newsletters or just individual meetings that we might have, education events. Those sorts of things are great, and we will continue to do them just as we did in 2020. But we think that partnering with some additional organizations, those serving the homeless, and groups like that will go a long way toward, excuse me, improving some of the results for 2030. I'm looking forward to hearing from those of you who are representing groups that are facing some of the immigration enforcement actions, and what we can do as an organization to help support efforts to get people over the fear factor, I guess, that we're going to be facing, that we didn't have quite as much of in our 2020 effort. The other thing that I wanted to mention is that we are a statewide organization, and so reaching out to some of the rural communities and things like that will also be a priority, where I know a lot of us kind of are in the Chicago metro area. We do have 42 leagues across the state, and so unlike sort of just state level organizations, we do have our manpower at more of the local level. And lesson learned there, I think, is to really tap those local resources to work with local community groups as much as we can to do education and outreach. And so just kind of looking back on the communication efforts that we did in 2020 and looking at some of the additional obstacles we face, those are the sorts of things that we can see as a couple of lessons learned and some things we'd like to do going forward.
Okay, good morning. So I'm here to talk about SIU and our efforts from 2020 and what we will be doing differently in 2030. As we know that obviously the COVID happened, and so many of our faculty, staff, as well as students were operating remotely. And so we obviously were encouraging it, but I think it'll look completely different this year, because we do anticipate that we will obviously have more face-to-face interaction. And I know even Kathy talked about, for example, rural communities. At SIU, we serve 66 regions, 66 counties in our particular area. And we're going to be able to really leverage relationships with organizations like the Springfield Immigrant Alliance, because we do have a close partnership with them, the NAACP, the Urban League. We have strong partnerships with our mayors. They often collaborate with us. And so even talking to our system president, it's like we're definitely going to encourage this. We have used voter registration drives. We've relied on registered student organizations to really rally the students, and we plan to continue to do that as well. Again, with the partnerships within the community, one of the things that we're doing to prepare for the census and just to also work closer with our rural communities is that we are in the process of hiring a director of the Rural Health Institute. And so there is an understanding that they're going to go into those communities. And I was actually a part of the interview process. And so one of my specific questions was, how are you going to build trust with communities that are reluctant, to rely on or to trust organizations like universities and outside individuals? And so that is something that we're actually gearing up for, to make sure that when that time comes, that we have somebody in place who's cultivated those relationships and who has the trust, so they can encourage that. So we recognize that just with 2020, it was not as much activity, but there is a strong census that we are on board, and we want to make sure that we are advancing and that we're being counted. The question is why the census matters, because we see it as an equity issue for all the reasons that Holly mentioned. But at SIU, we define equity as act right, make right, do right. And we see this as an opportunity to make it right for the people who weren't counted, for the individuals who wasn't reached out to, who didn't have their voices heard. And again, it affects resources in the community. It affects how people, engage with our university. And so that is something that we're very committed to. And we look forward to, I know this is the initial kickoff meeting, but we look forward to participating and making sure that we're leveraging all the relationships so that, again, everyone in our community can be counted.
Good morning, everyone. This is Jose with the Latino Policy Forum. I think that Holly really explained well why census is important, but also kind of why the Latino Policy Forum focused on two specific populations that seem important for us. For obvious reasons, Latinos. In 2024, the number of Latinos living in Illinois was a little under 2.4 million. That's 19% of the population. That means that in the past decade, there was a growth of nearly 2% points, and that is something that is important. Also, we saw that in the 2020 census, it missed 4.99% of Latinos. That is around 120,000, and that's more than 3 times the 2010 undercount rate, which gives us a sense that we need to increase our efforts in terms of outreach. If you multiply that by the $1,400 that you lose annually per person that you miss, right? That those were kind of the calculations that were made. That would mean that by losing those Latinos, the state loses $457 million annually. Right. And that gives us a sense of why it's important to focus on this population. And also in the children under 5. That is, in 2020 census failed to count almost 1 million children, 0 to 4 nationally. Of those, 400,000 were Latinos. So that is very significant. The net undercount rate for Latino children was 8.6% compared to 5.6% with non-Latinos. That gives us also an understanding, right, of what is important and how are we going to do the outreach. We're similar to what everyone is talking about, right? You need strong partnerships. You need people that folks trust, and was very difficult back then, but it's going to be even more difficult, right, at this time. But we need to continue to leverage those relationships. The Latino Policy Forum has a lot of community-based organizations that provide wraparound services, but particularly in the early childhood space. So that is one of the partnerships that we were leveraging. Also, parents that are very engaged in the education of their children. We have multicultural parent councils throughout the city, and there's bilingual advisory councils throughout the states, which is hundreds and hundreds, right, of Latino and immigrant parents that are very committed, right, to the education of their children, and they're very eager to see how they can get engaged in their schools. So just being able to have conversations with them, explain how important it is, and them also to serve as intermediaries, right? How can they spread the word of the importance of doing this is something that we will definitely continue to do. And besides that, obviously offering information in a way that is accessible in terms of language, in terms of culture, things that can resonate with folks. I don't think that I can share my screen, but at the Latino Policy Forum we did last time around, we did something like a loteria census game, which is kind of a Mexican bingo. So we had this cards with pictures around the census, and we distributed among many of the community-based organizations so parents could take it home and they could play with their children around census and they could learn about the importance, right? So just trying to find creative ways and trying to find that part of the population that regardless of what we continuously do, we never tap into. How can we be creative and just go that extra mile, right, to those that. And it's going to be difficult because what we're seeing right now is that there's so much information that we're all trying to put on the hands of folks that at the end of the day, there's too much, right? And what are some clear messages and what's the most important thing that we want people to learn, right? So that's something that I think that we all need to collectively reflect on. Thank you.
Hello, good morning, everyone. My name is Anna. I am the Managing Director of Strategy at AMPT, Advancing Nonprofits. And thank you so much to Kathy, Dr. Sheila, and Jose for everything that you shared. I think my purpose is just to double tap and double sign on everything that you all have talked about. And also, Jose, all of those numbers, thank you so much for bringing those Black and white figures into the space. And I think one of the things that I really want to talk about too is the fact that we know that right now, so many of our communities are incredibly wary of completing government forms. There's very little trust in government right now in many of our community leaders and also the communities that they're serving. But people trust their local community centers, they trust their churches, they trust their clinics. And those are our partners here at AMT. We're partnering with over 200 nonprofit organizations and community-based organizations across the city. And what we are hoping to do is to really continue to partner with Forefront to ensure that our community leaders are getting the information that they need to understand what it takes to make sure that this census is successful. Because we know that as we support with capacity building efforts for our nonprofit leaders to be successful on their own terms, we cannot be successful without the resources that we are owed. And we are not able to build capacity on invisible numbers. And so in order to make sure that our communities are seen and counted and funded in 2030, we are doing our best to ensure that we can mobilize those efforts. As Jose already mentioned, the undercounting that was incredibly significant in our Black and Latina communities in Chicago, about 3.3% for Black people and 4.9% for Latina individuals. There is just a deep and justified fear of how this data is going to be used. And so there's a hesitation to even complete, and not to mention, as Holly already talked about, the idea of not really understanding the process, not understanding what the data will be used for, and difficulty with accessing anything to be able, whether it's online or the census itself. And so we are hoping to be able to mobilize our community leaders, equip them with the education that they need in community with Forefront, so that we are really getting those, that we're really getting counted. And we are knowing as well that our fear from being counted is not protecting ourselves. It's actually making it easier for the state to ignore our needs. And it's making it easier for funds to be reallocated away from our communities. So it's important in 2030 that we are able to take back the power of our own data. And we're excited to deepen our partnerships to make sure that that happens. Thank you all so much for this time.
Thank you all. We really appreciate you. And feel free to chime in as we go, and feel free to ask questions to these speakers as we move forward. And I've shared their respective websites in chat. So if you're not already in touch with these organizations, we encourage you to follow them, of course, and support their good work. So with that kind of grounding, we want to move forward and look back at what happened in 2020, just to remind folks of the structures that were in place, and how those might inform what we do in 2030, whether we replicate some of them or not, just to kind of refresh since it's been a minute. So as we move on to the next slide, we'll just quickly look back at what we learned. So the first major factor that turned everything upside down, of course, was the pandemic. So that upended most of what folks had planned to do around Census Day. We had, universities and nonprofits with boxes full of swag that they were planning to distribute at events that they suddenly couldn't distribute. So this photo of me is a moment where I picked up some of that stuff from a local university where I live in Bloomington Normal, and then drove it around to food banks and other places that could potentially still distribute materials. So I think, part of what we all learned was to prepare for the unexpected. And while we certainly don't want to have another pandemic, there will be something, right? So we just need to be ready and have time to scenario plan for different possibilities as we get started. And that's part of why we're starting so early now. So we also saw that we, if you go back 1 second, Lacey, sorry. I just wanted to stress, I think folks agreed in 2020 that the partnerships that were established between the public and private sectors really were effective and supported a much better count in Illinois than we would have had otherwise. And even so, we still had an undercount in our state. So while we had a record self-response rate of almost like +8 percentage points increase, we still had an undercount and lost a U.S. House seat. So we want to build upon those public-private partnerships that were so effective last time and try to do even better in 2030. And then finally, we understand everybody agreed that we should have started earlier. And while the partnerships were tremendously successful, they would have probably been even more successful if we had started earlier. So I'm going to review a little bit of that timeline, but we are in 2026, 4 years from today is Census Day 2030. And while that may seem like a very long runway, when you reflect on the timeline that transpired in 2020, we're right there. And so to not begin now would be potentially not starting earlier, as we all agreed we should. So on the next slide, I just want to recap first what the private sector did, and then we'll look at what the state did. So as a reminder, Forefront hired 2 full-time staff that manage the census work. And the philanthropic sector created a funders collaborative and pooled funds together. About 23 foundations participated in that, and those are listed here. Those listed do not include a couple that participated anonymously. So there were a few anonymous contributors to that shared fund. And all told, about almost $2 million were raised, and 42 organizations received grant money from that funding pool, totaling about $1.5 million. And it was over roughly 2 years. And when looking at just a pure average, that meant the participants or the recipients of the funding got about $18,000 each per year. But that's a strict average. Some got much more or less. So just a reminder about how that worked. And then on the next slide, we've got a recap of the state and what they did. So the state in 2017 promulgated the enabling legislation that formed the Complete Count Commission, which was operated through the Secretary of State's office. So it's 2016, and so we'll need to be thinking about similar enabling legislation in the next year. The governor also issued an executive order in 2019 that established the Census Advisory Panel and IDHS's Census Office. So it was the state office that had different locations around the state with full-time staff. And then finally, the General Assembly also appropriated a much larger amount of money than the private sector raised to support the state's grant-making program that was operated by IDHS. So I'll share a couple related links from 2020 just to refresh folks about those structures. As we move to the next slide, I believe I'm handing it off to my friend Charmaine.
Hello, everyone. So in terms of the state's role, one of the things they've done was establish the 11 regions, and that was how, and that was part of the pandemic response as well, not just the census. So a lot of it are interrelated and integrated. And so they've established about 11 regional intermediaries, and these intermediaries were, they knew their communities the best. They were the ones that were connecting the different stakeholders and the, trusted voices that are in those communities. And so it was basically a spoken hub model. So the regional intermediary was, was at the center, and then we reached out to the community members through there. And then really establishing the trusted voices concept and relying on them to overcome the mistrust in government and some of the other issues in terms of accessing census folks and the census information. And then local government role, and this is where in 2020, I was in local government as a village trustee in Hanover Park. And so one of the things we did prior to the census was take part in the local update of the census addresses, LUCA, through their GIS system, which is the Geographic Update Partnership Software, which many of the communities across Illinois has. That happens a few years before, and we'll talk more about, it coming up in the next year, but that's something that we need to prepare for. Again, collaborate with, and I first identify and then collaborate with the trusted voices in our own communities, and then form our own census working groups, rely on both our own funding as municipalities, as well as seek out funding through both the state, other opportunities like Forefront and other places. And And we were one of the 42 grantees in the previous census as well, just because at that time, and still, Hanover Park is one of the largest immigrant population, as well as one of the most diverse communities in Illinois. So because of that, we concentrated on some of the previous census tracts that showed that where we had undercount and where we had communities that needed a little bit more awareness in order to fill out the census. So the next slide, I'm trying to remember, yes, some of the key milestones for Forefront was that once we've completed the census work in 2020, we have the Illinois County report that you can find in the chat. We've also staffed up a little bit more to be more comprehensive in the way that we approach the local communities. We filled the director position with Holly, and then shortly 6 months after Holly, I came on board as the Racial Equity Collective Director. And then we've supplemented that a little bit more to ensure that we are able to address the rest of the state, in the work to stay connected and to serve the different communities. And then we'll talk a little bit more about the, I'll touch on a little bit about the REC and how we've, Lacey, if you could go to the next slide, how we've relied on some of the census, what do you call, recommendations that came out. One of them was, working on on creating basically when we created the Racial Equity Collective, we gave a survey out across the state of Illinois. We created the iDream map. A lot of it used the same information that we used for the census, where we went back to many of the regional intermediaries, many of the partners that were part of the census work. And so a lot of this is interconnected, and census, yes, it happens once a decade, but the implications of that we carry out throughout the rest of the decade before the next one. And so what we've done with the Racial Equity Collective was similar to the regional intermediaries. We are, when we have our cohort that come together from different parts of the state, it's both to help build capacity and leadership development, but then also to reestablish those community relationships through the regional roundtables. And so we're hoping, once we have more of these regional roundtables across the state, as we gear up for the census, we can rely on some of these conversations to further the work of, reaching out to our different community members. We've been building and growing in this work. One of the things that we've done was also bring everyone together through our annual lunches, which we'll talk more about later. But this year, we've grown even further by partnering with IDHS and their Healing Illinois grant. And just briefly, Healing Illinois is again based on the same model, the same hub and spoke model of the regional intermediaries. This is how they stay connected with the rest of the state. And so we're grateful to be in partnership with them again, reestablish those same networks that we've had previously, and just really bolster our ability to reach all of Illinois when we are re-engaging the census efforts. And then lastly, very briefly, we have partnered with the Chicago Lawyers Committee and the Chicago Bar Foundation to build the Nonprofit Resilience Hub, which helps a lot of the nonprofit organizations overcome some of the recent challenges in terms of serving the undercounted population. And then I will go to the next slide and hand it back to Holly.
Do you want to briefly mention your work with the governor's office?
Yes, there was,
then we'll move
sure.
on.
There's the one extra slide. So one of the ways we've been interacting with the state as well is including the governor's office. They have the Racial Equity Action Plan that they implemented with all of their state agencies. And then what we have done with the Racial Equity Collective is help to share that model and some of the frameworks, that they use in the agencies, and connect those agencies to many of the community organizations across different parts of the state. So a lot of the learnings that come not just from the census, but from the American Community Survey and just from our specific work in the communities, we lift up those those issues. And then this is more a long-term way for us to create sustainable plans to again, deal with some of the challenges in the local areas. And so and this is again one example of public-private partnerships. And Holly had mentioned previously, this is something we rely on tremendously to be successful in the way that we reach out to different community members. And so we'll continue to not just work with the Governor's Office of Equity, but we'll work with other both state and local partners to ensure that the census rollout happens as much more smoothly than last time. And Holly, if you want to talk through the philanthropy roundtable, and then you can talk a little bit more.
Yeah, I think we'll move on for the sake of time, but
Sure.
folks in the room that are grant makers that are not plugged into the philanthropy roundtable, if you would let us know, we'll get you connected to that work that's being coordinated by Grace Ho in the governor's office. So we'll move on to the next slide, and just a quick recap here of how we've built capacity in our policy program, and what I want to just focus on here is that we understand from surveying folks since 2020 that census continues to be something that folks ask forefront to prioritize. And because of that, we've kept our foot in the game as we've recapped for you already. And we've grown our list of stakeholders very significantly from a couple hundred to well over 800 organizations right now. We're doing our best to reach folks that may care about this work and may want to engage. And you can always refer people to us if we're missing important voices. So please know the door is open for that. And we're always diligently trying to expand our reach on this, not just the census work, but our desire to support civic engagement within the nonprofit sector more broadly and on an evergreen basis. So for now, let's keep going. I just want to kind of quickly recap some things that have shifted since 2020, and Melina's going to chime in shortly here on some of those changes. One thing I neglected to share previously was the final report from 2020 that recaps the Count Me In program from 2020. So that's in chat for you. For those that want to review that, it lists the Advocacy Coalition members, the funders, and so on. So as we shift gears here, a lot has changed since 2020. There are several changes to the census form itself that are either complete or pending or potentially coming. The first being there will be a newly combined race and ethnicity question. The screenshot here shows the new format, which is allowing folks to check multiple boxes and then also enter additional information when that's applicable. So it gives people more ability to represent their identities in a more complex way. And Forefront submitted comments to support these changes, along with probably many of you and our colleagues in other states. So that is complete and expected to be on the new form. A couple other areas that are shifting sands include the sexual orientation and gender identity question, where the Bureau had conducted research on how to revise related questions. And there is pending litigation related to that, and a related executive order, and some rulemaking that's ensued. So the status of that is a little uncertain at this moment. And I'll share some related resources for those that care about that issue in chat. Also, we see a variety of attempts to add a citizenship question to the census, and relatedly, and in breaking news this morning, birthright citizenship being revisited by the courts. And so we've got legislative proposals that would add a citizenship question, that one of which has moved through the House, awaiting Senate action, and potentially administrative attempts, which was the route that was attempted in 2020, which was then blocked by the Supreme Court. However, we have a new Supreme Court now with different membership and different dynamics. So we're the administration to try to make a similar attempt. Administratively, it's possible we would have a different outcome than we did in 2020. If Congress were to advance legislation that adds a citizenship question to the form, that would be almost impossible to undo, even if political dynamics change later. So these are serious things we need to watch. And I'll share some some resources about the citizenship question and also the conversations around birthright citizenship and some recent press on these issues. And if folks have questions, we can come back to that. Also, very importantly, there are multiple attempts to, with an eye on the bigger picture around civic engagement in our democracy. As you all know, there's multiple attempts to revisit the Voting Rights Act and kind of chip around the edges for in various ways for how voting rights are assigned in this country. And so they've been attempting to do it in various ways, and I'll share some related resources. But Forefront has a very firm commitment to defending the Voting Rights Act. That's something that we will engage on as needed at the federal level. And it impacts a lot of these same issues. And with the attempt to add a citizenship question, just to like connect dots a little bit, even I'm not an attorney, so important disclaimer. And I know there are attorneys in the room that can speak to this as well. But what the citizenship question attempt is with an eye on impacting political power. So at the beginning, I talked about apportionment being a part of how census data are used. So by adding a citizenship question, the goal is to reduce the political power or representation in Congress of communities that have a lot of folks that are not citizens, because it would impact apportionment if those folks are not counted. Interestingly, people promulgating that effort are not considering how it would also reduce the number of dollars that flow to those communities as well. So it's in their own self-interest not to do that, but they're only thinking arguably about the apportionment impact. So it's important that we try to educate folks about all of the ways census data impact communities for the better. So other folks may have comment on that. I'm certainly not an expert, but just wanted to help kind of connect those dots a little bit. So with that, yes, sorry.
I'm sorry, can you briefly explain the impact? You said apportionment versus, I just wanted to understand.
So we have 435 seats in Congress, no matter what. So when one state has more people, they get more seats, and vice versa. So we're non-citizens to be excluded and not counted. States that have more citizens would get more seats in Congress and vice versa. Does that make sense?
Oh, it makes perfect sense.
Okay.
Start counting people as 3/5. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So but that's the driving goal behind the efforts to add the citizenship question. They want to reduce the political power of communities that have more folks who are not citizens. But they're losing sight of the other aspects that could also help their communities. Okay, so for the sake of time, we do need to move on. Mid-cycle redistricting is also shifting. As you all know, there's attempts now to redistrict when normally that would occur after the census, but we don't have time to dig in on that. So let's go into the next slide. And I just want to quickly recap here, like some of the key messages that we used in prior census cycles will not probably be effective in 2030. So generally speaking, there's all kinds of federal funds being cut, so we can't rely on old funding formulas. We know that there's real concerns around the safety of data and the potential for the Bureau to share data with ICE when in the past that wasn't true. And then also, of course, the mid-cycle redistricting. So we're going to need smart folks to think about new messages that work because we do still need to count people. And we also understand that there's real concerns and valid concerns that folks might have to where they might not want to participate. So moving on to the next slide. I'm going to hand it off to Melina, who's going to start us off with a look at what's going on at the federal level, and then we're going to hear from our friend Senator Guzman.
Thank you so much, Holly. I'm Melina Sanchez. I'm the funder liaison with the Census Funder Collaborative for a national and regional pooled fund, really focused on a fair and accurate both 2030 census and ACS. And it's great to be with you all today and hear about all the great partnerships and work in Illinois. So every census we know faces unique threats. 2030 census certainly exceeds the challenges of the most recent decades. I'll highlight some of the threats we're tracking, which many of our speakers have alluded to today. So as all the speakers have shared the mistrust of government, there are confidentiality protections called Title 13, and we haven't seen direct efforts to undermine those protections. But obviously, there's deep concern around data privacy given the broader patterns of government data sharing we're seeing. No surprise, combined with the ICE raids and deportations, many people are increasingly afraid to interact with government. And as Holly mentioned, many of us are closely monitoring the proposals to add a citizenship question to the census and to restrict the use of non-citizen data in apportionment. Second, there's operational decisions that could impact participation. So the administration, unfortunately, has eliminated key external advisory bodies that would traditionally help inform the count. Current operational plans also show a near elimination of address canvassing, further elimination of local census offices, and the administration has, in general, issued an English-only executive order. So some concerns there. And most recently, the Bureau announced it will significantly scale back their planned testing for 2026, which will take place in just 2 sites. We're also looking at challenges around resource and capacity. So the Bureau is facing major workforce reductions. About 1,300 of its roughly 4,000 employees accepted buyouts last year, including many of the senior staff who do have deep institutional knowledge, and in general, budget cuts and concerns that there'll be more limited opinion research and reduced advertising capacity add hurdles. And finally, misinformation. We're seeing a growing volume of false or misleading content, especially online. And there's still uncertainty on some items. Will the Bureau use the U.S. Postal Service for outreach? How will the digital divide affect participation in the census? So I know the landscape has a lot of threats that we've been discussing, but next slide, don't want you to fret. There's a lot that we're confronting, but despite all of this, we need to press forward. There's a lot of time from now till 2030. We don't know which administration will be in charge then. What we do know is we want to be ready. We want to have make sure folks are at the table, that we have a resilient infrastructure in place that can pivot as needed over the next years with limited federal funding. It's even more important to ensure we have an accurate count, and we need to start thinking now about our strategies and our game plan. Some good news, there is already a national funder and field infrastructure that we can build from. So the Census Funder Club, we bring together funders and are investing in national policy work, research like the fact sheets that Holly was dropping in the chat, get out the count planning. We fund the National Stakeholder Coalition called Census Counts. They developed a roadmap to 2030 with a timeline for nonprofits to take action. And we're supporting the States Count Action Network. They also are a learning network for state and local organizations. So there's a lot of work we can build from. And for the next slide, we're also seeing strong momentum at the state level. Essentially, there's 19 states, including Illinois, that have already been hosting their own state census funder event, and another 20 states are planning to have events later this year. So we see good momentum. For example, in Pennsylvania, funders recently pulled over $1 million for census work through a statewide RFP. So other states are also beginning to plan early LUCA efforts, engaging their gubernatorial candidates, and just know that you're part of a larger community of funders working on this, and you don't have to figure this out on your own.
Thanks, Melina. And your lovely map slide is later in the program. I apologize.
Oh,
We
no worries.
had a little miscommunication about where that belongs, but
I
we'll
got
get
ahead
to
of
it.
myself.
Yeah. No, you're fine. I appreciate you mentioning that. If there's questions for Melina, please pop those in chat. And Melina, if you are actually able to share, you mentioned a few organizations that are key at the national level. If you'd be able to just add those to chat so people can follow those, that would be helpful too. Those are missing from my links list.
Sure.
So appreciate that. And then we'll include them in follow-up. And I did want to pause and remind folks, we're planning to send all of the links and slides with the recording after the program. So just a reminder about that for folks that are frantically trying to get links. Just rest easy. You'll get them in a summary fashion soon. So moving on, we're going to just start talking now about where we're headed and some of the key points in time that we have our eye on and milestones that we're mapping out at a very high level at this stage. So first, there's a series of activities that need to happen, right? So there's the organizing side of things, there's what funders should be doing, and there's what Forefront will be doing. So here we've got just some markers around the organizing activities that need to happen in the field. And also these also include things that the Bureau itself will be doing over the next few years. So of course, today we're launching in a formal way, in a statewide public way, our program that will roll out over the next 4 to 6 years. And we, between now and Census Day, have important milestones that will shift and impact strategies, including the midterm election later this year, and then the presidential election in what is fiscal year 29, the end of calendar year 28. So those things will impact what happens politically and what Congress does and what might end up on the form and related lawsuits and all kinds of stuff. So we need time to think about scenario planning for different outcomes that are impacted by our elections. And then about this time next year, the Bureau starts operating the local update of census addresses, which is an invitation to local governments to voluntarily participate in an exercise that allows them to update their master address file with new developments or changes in addresses at the very local level. And that process underpins the accurate count later, because that master address file is what they use to find folks. So some of these exercises are going to start in the fairly short term, and things are going to start happening in the short term. So again, we just need to be making sure folks are engaged. And for those, somebody asked about what LUCA stands for. It's the local update of census addresses. So that's really an important thing for the state and local governments to pay attention to, because it is something that local governments engage directly with the Bureau on in a voluntary fashion. So we want to urge Illinois' local governments to participate in that exercise. On the next slide, we've got some fundraising milestones that Forefront has in mind. So we're going to continue unpacking this over the next few minutes, but we're looking at like 3 basic phases of a grant cycle for the privately funded grants. Right now, we're in what we would already consider the planning phase, where Forefront is trying to raise money so we can staff up ourselves to make sure we can run this program. And then next, and fairly soon, we'll be moving into the cycle where we have partners that are also organizing, and we are making those sub-grants to folks all over the state, which might include some of you. And then, of course, in fiscal year 30, that's when Census Day actually occurs. So that's the implementation kind of peak. And then our intent is to help folks wind down more than we did in 2020 by extending the grant making for a longer period of time to support evaluation and that wind down process, so we don't have an abrupt cutoff where folks are kind of left in the lurch. On the next slide, we've got some recommendations from some of the key groups that Melina mentioned. So that includes the Funders Committee on Civic Participation and the Leadership Council's Roadmap to 2030. So these are what folks in those nationwide organizations are asking funders to be doing now and then over the next few years. So we are actively in conversation with funders in Illinois about this right now. We're already in that fundraising mode, and we'll be talking in more detail shortly about what our grant program will look like, which is of course contingent upon our ability to successfully raise funds. But we're pleased so far with the engagement we're seeing. We can go on to the next slide. So
Holly, I just want to chime in. Senator Guzman has joined the call.
Thank you. Hi, Senator. We're about ready for you. Just let me set you up here real quick. So let's go on to the next slide. And we've got, I'll skip the role of forefront because we've covered a lot of these issues for now. On the next slide, just a reminder about the role of government, where both the executive branch and the General Assembly have a role to play. And that's why Senator Guzman is here. She's our chief sponsor of a related piece of legislation. So I'm going to hand it to her and Sebastian to go over what we're working on with the state. Thanks so much for coming. We appreciate you.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Sebastian. Nice to see everyone this morning. Brief. We have two pieces of legislation this year in Springfield. One being carried by Representative Justin Slaughter in the Illinois House, who's the chair of the Black Caucus. And then we have the amazing State Senator Graciela Guzman, who is carrying our Senate bill in the state Senate. So I'll pass it on to her to explain a little bit about the communities she represents in her district, her experience in 2020 at the last census cycle, and why it's important for the state to begin preparing for census efforts now rather than later.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here this morning and for the work that you all are doing to make sure that our communities are seen and heard and counted. For those of you that I may not have met yet, I'm State Senator Graciela Guzman. My pronouns are she, hers, ella. I proudly represent Illinois' 20th district, which includes parts of Chicago's Northwest Side, including Albany Park, Belmont-Cragen, Logan Square. I'm also the eldest daughter of 5 children and the daughter of Salvadorian immigrants, and grew up in a community where we were mostly refugee and asylee and what I would consider folks off the grid. And so because of that, I grew up with this like really deep understanding of what it means to take care of your family and your community, because you're kind of in the fringes of a system that doesn't count you and often overlooks you. But I've also seen what that looks like in my childhood in terms of the resources that communities like mine back home and my own district should have. It looks like packed classrooms where resources don't match the number of students that are there. I've seen families, including mine, that have been doubled up for housing, doing everything that they're doing and can be doing to stay afloat. It looks like clinics that are stretched too thin, trying to meet overwhelming need in our district. We've seen language barriers shut people out of systems that they're fully entitled to access. And that is what undercounting looks like in real life and in real time in districts like mine and all throughout our state. Because the census is not just a count. It is also a decision. It is a decision about who gets Medicaid, who gets funding for schools, who gets access to housing, who gets investment, and who gets left behind. And I think as many of us that are on this call know, we know that feeling in our body. We know who gets left out. It's Black communities, it's Latino communities, it's immigrant families, young children, renters, people who are in shared housing and dorms and nursing homes and jails. They're the people who need this investment the most, but yet are the most likely to be missed. Y eso no es por casualidad. It's not, just a random occurrence. So right now we're operating in a climate where there are active efforts to undermine trust, to spread fear, and to erase our communities from the data that drives funding and representation in this country. So we need to say it plainly. When people are not counted, it's not neutral. Those are power and resources that are being stripped away from our communities, and that's erasure, and we cannot allow for that to happen. And that's why I'm really, really proud to be working with Forefront and this coalition on the pathway to the census in 2030, I'm sorry, because we also have folks that are saying that this kind of planning can come later, that it can wait. But we know better. We know better because the decisions that we make right now determine whether Illinois secures the resources that our futures and our communities are owed for the next decade. So that's why I was really, really proud again to file the Road to the Census 2030 Act, because preparation is power. Because starting early is how we make sure that every single address is counted, that every community is reached, and that every single dollar that should be coming to Illinois actually does. And, I think the best part of this morning and seeing you all here on the Zoom is that this is not just my work or Leader or Rep Slaughter's work, that this is a coalition, that partners like you all, advocates, organizers, and leaders all across the state are coming forth because this is really important, that we have caucuses, including our Latino caucus, our Black caucus, our Asian caucus, our downstate caucus, that also see that this is really important, because this is what it looks like when Illinois comes together to say, we are going to do this because it is right. And it's going to take all of us, because we're all going to need to be trusted messengers. We're all going to need to be community organizations that are getting the word out. We are the people that know how to reach families in their language, in their communities, with trust. And that's what it's going to take to make sure that every child is counted, that every family is counted, that every community is counted, porque todos contamos. So I'll leave you with this. At a time when the stakes are high, when there are very real efforts to erase and underfund our communities, we also have something incredibly powerful here. We have a coalition that knows how to organize, that knows how to reach people, and that knows how to deliver. And together we can make sure that Illinois is fully funded.
Thank you so much, Senator. We appreciate you. I know you're back to back today. Thanks for making time to be here.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. We'll be in touch soon. Charmaine's going to pick it up right here.
Hey, I'm back. If you can send to the next slide, please. Thanks. So some of the things that we had already talked about before about the role of local governments, we've already mentioned, this is something that they prepare for a few years before. That few years is now. We're already going towards the middle of 2026. So as community organizers and as other organizations that are in your local communities as constituents, this is something you can ask your local government representatives about. Where they are in the process. This is something that they do, with their internally, but again, this pushing as constituents doesn't necessarily hurt. When we talk about reestablishing the census working groups, I think it's really important, especially in diverse communities. We have different perspectives that are represented in those working groups, and so from my experience with Hanover Park, we've relied a lot on faith groups, schools, and then also local businesses. We've known from many campaigns that people may have been a part of that salons and some of these other businesses are tremendous places to, network and share information. And so bringing them together more strategically into working groups and beginning that conversation now will really help to organize us later when we are getting into the throes of reaching out to those communities. And then one of the things that we hadn't talked about as much is just, looking back at previous census information, previous American Community Survey information in order to prepare us for Census 2030. So again, I'm relying on my experience with Hanover Park. One of the things we've done was even before the Census Day and any of the information that came from the Census Bureau, we looked at the hard to count census tracts that are within our own communities. We looked at who are the influential leaders and those that are connected to their communities, and then reached out proactively ahead of time to again get a sense of how do we better build those trusts now, so that later when we are when we need them to be a part of this conversation, that they can then bring those communities along with them. So a lot of this is similar to things that the local government may have done previously, but it's more important than ever now to really build trust and relationship with the key leaders, that represent many of those undercounted communities.
Thanks, Charmaine. So moving on here, we just want to remind, especially the private foundations in the room who have very strict rules around what they can do when it comes to public policy and democracy and civic engagement work, that Census is actually a really safe space that allows funders to engage without violating any of the IRS rules, even for private foundations. So we just want to encourage folks to dig in on this and start thinking about how you can support a full count in Illinois if that applies to you. So with that reminder, in terms of the role of private philanthropy, which supplements what we just covered related to local governments and the state government, there's more than one way for the funding community to engage. So if you're a grant making organization, there's the leadership aspect that we're going to need. And then there's also, of course, the obvious funding aspect. So we're not ready yet to launch the so-called steering committee or establish co-chair roles for a funders collaborative in Illinois. That'll come later, primarily because we understand in most cases, most folks can't commit to a 6 or 7 year co-chair role. So we'll ramp that up when time's a little more time has elapsed and we're a little closer to that peak time. But in the meantime, we are going to start pulling together that group of funders that are very dedicated and committed to coming on board early. And then we understand others will come on board later when things get closer to Census Day. There will also be opportunities for philanthropic leaders to potentially be appointed to those state advisory bodies I mentioned earlier, as those are re-upped by the state. So we'll be, of course, in touch with folks as that starts to roll out. And then we're actively talking to funders. The Forefronts team is actively talking to funders and asking folks to raise their hand if they're willing to come on board now for those smaller, shorter term planning grants. And then later we'll need more folks to come on board with larger multi-year grants and commitments to support that robust statewide grant program. And then we also are asking folks to consider how we can sustain this democracy and civic engagement work beyond Census Day 2030. We would preferably and ideally like to see this commitment to civic engagement and democracy work in the charitable sector in Illinois become an evergreen permanent part of what we do. And Forefront's really committed to trying to make that happen. So moving on, we want to also flag, these are suggestions from Melina. So I'm going to bring her back in. And Melina, you'll find that map you mentioned on the next slide after this.
Sure. Yeah. So there are many ways funders can be engaging now. So, Holly was just talking about moving resources to the field. So there's state-based pooled fund, funding directly to groups. We have at the national level a pooled fund. Folks here have already been talking about LUCA, so learning more about the LUCA program. Holly dropped in the chat some funder guides on LUCA, and there's a lot of resources there. And, to really be thorough, the process needs to begin well in advance of the formal start in 2027. Facilitating learning within your institutions to understand how the foundation and your grantees use census data to advance your mission. Leveraging your convening power, bringing together funders, nonprofits, policymakers, and others to plan for 2030, using your communications platforms to emphasize the importance of data integrity in the lead up to 2020. A lot of funders were either, posting in local op-eds or blogs or on their websites. So we know you all have a lot of communication platforms and just encouraging other funders to really get involved. And for the map, I think we're good. Essentially, Illinois is kind of with the right group. 19 state events have already been held, so we're really enjoying seeing all the momentum in states across the country.
Yeah, it's good to know if it feels early, it really isn't, and that map affirms it. So thank you for providing that. So finally, we want to look at the role of public charities. So those of you that are not grant makers, but obviously still have a huge role to play in this, and we're happy to have this joint event where everybody can get on the same page about the possibilities here. So when we're thinking about public charities, there's kind of two different categories here that we can think about. And so that's what we've laid out here is some ideas about that are, this is certainly not an exhaustive list, but ideas about how those that provide direct services, whether that's healthcare or after school programs or food pantries or whatever, all the whole range of those that are in the community providing services and programs to folks in their communities. There's lots of opportunities for public charities to provide whether it's like flyers or swag or educational materials to folks to encourage them to understand the census and participate in the census. And that's the kind of work that in 2020 was directly supported through both the state and privately funded grant programs. And then additionally, we also have organizations that do advocacy work that are really focused on organizing. And in some cases, organizations do both of these, certainly. But advocates and organizers can really help provide that convening role at the local level where you're pulling together leaders from direct service provider organizations and urging them to participate. Of course, there's the obvious role for door knockers. And very importantly, on the advocacy side, those that are able to participate in the legal strategy and response as legal issues emerge. That would apply to funders as well. Funders can help fund legal intervention. That's certainly something we will need. So there's a role for everyone to play, and that's what we're trying to hammer home here. So we need all of you to be following along and joining us as things start to ramp up. So on the next slide, we're going to start wrapping up here and can certainly take questions, but we wanted to give all of you just a couple of nudges or ideas around how to prepare and to know where we're headed and what's next. So we can go on to the next slide. Just as a heads up, here's where Forefront's thinking and where our goal is for 2030. So we're significantly and aggressively increasing our goal for fundraising. And what we're trying to do is raise enough money to stretch the grant making and the private sector over a much longer period of time, including this ramp up period and then a longer wind down period at the end. And to be able to make more grants that are larger to more organizations around the state and do that over a longer period of time. So we have this ambitious fundraising goal that we'll be engaging in, and we already are engaging in over the next several years. And so were we to not meet this goal, we would have to adjust the number of grants, the size of the grants, and the length of the grants, essentially according to that. But we're very excited, and so far, folks are being very responsive. So please stay tuned for announcements. You won't see an announcement for a funding opportunity in the coming months. We're, probably a year away from that, but you will certainly be notified when that's available. On the next slide, here's just a snapshot of how that lays out over the next few years. So we're hoping to have, raised money to staff up by the end of this year. And then going into fiscal year 27, we've established those multi-year commitments that will allow us to begin the grant making that we talked about earlier. On the next slide, those of you that are here, thank you. We appreciate that you're thinking about this early and excited to have such a great turnout today. You can start talking to your boards regardless of what kind of organization you are. Even if you're a local government, you can be talking to your council and staff and just making sure that people understand that this work is starting and that it's something that we need to start building into our capacity and budgets over the next year. So whether it's a funder or your own direct service organization or local government, thinking about what needs to happen resource-wise in fiscal year 27, which in most cases begins July 1 of this year. So that can support LUCA or other planning work as things ramp up. And then we know in 2020, folks had some challenges managing census work kind of suddenly on top of everything else they were doing, especially with the pandemic impacting most practice. So we would encourage folks to be thinking now about how to prepare internally. And I'll pause and hand it off to Charmaine to see if she wants to add anything to that. And we're going to start wrapping up here with some opportunities in the short term.
In the interest of time, we can just keep going. I think we covered a lot before. So the next thing that all of you can participate in is we have a lunch coming up on May 11th. And the main focus of that lunch is to bring together racial equity leaders from across the state who are engaged in a lot of the census work we had previously talked about. But more than the census, we really want to talk through, what are the different levers and different ways that we can strengthen the organizations and then our ability to continue to serve those that are that don't receive the resources that they need, essentially. And so there we will have, we're excited to have our Attorney General, Kwame Raoul, give opening remarks. And then we also have Diane Yentl coming from National Council of Nonprofits. I believe a couple of our panelists are already on this call, Lawrence Benito at Illinois Coalition for Immigrant and Refugee Rights, as well as Amanda Hu at the Illinois Community Power Fund. And we have Casey at Joyce Foundation, as well as Venu Gupta from Chicago Lawyers Committee will all be there. So the main purpose of this, again, we have the panel discussion about that, but we will also have, again, this is a partnership with Healing Illinois that we had mentioned before. But what we're also excited about is providing opportunity to all of you to really engage with each other on specific topics. So our structure is both a panel discussion and a roundtable conversation. And so one of the roundtable conversations will be about census. So those of you that are on this call that would like to meet each other, get to talking with each other, please do come, and you can jumpstart some of these conversations that we've already talked about. The QR code is there, and we'll throw the link in the chat as well. But that's the most immediate one, and hopefully we'll see you all there.
Thanks, Charmaine. The next slide is our final just call to action here. I see questions in chat about how to follow this work. We don't have a form yet. I would anticipate that we'll be building something like that in the near future. But for now, if you're here, it's because you somehow either got a direct invitation or are already following the right things. So just stay close. Forefront's website does provide opportunity to sign up for our emails. And then also, importantly, for those that follow our policy work specifically, there's a policy action center on our website that is the place to sign up if you want updates on the legislation and other related democracy or voting rights or breaking news in the policy world. So we also would invite you to follow the organizations that spoke today, and Melina offered a couple of tips about those at the national level. Definitely follow Funders Committee for Civic Participation if you aren't. They're doing lots of good work. And they just appointed Forefront's former colleague, Anita Banerjee, who ran the census program in 2020 as their executive director. So that's very exciting. We're very proud. And we still talk to Anita all the time. So we have 5 minutes left of our scheduled time to tackle any unanswered questions. So the floor is open now for questions on any topic. Especially if we missed you in chat, if you would speak up verbally or raise your hand, that will help us make sure we didn't miss you. Go back to the timeline slide. Mariah, which timeline slide? There were a few. Maybe Lacey can toggle back with the expected funding. I think Lacey, go back a couple more to it laid out the like phases of the grant making. Oh, sorry. No, it was the other one. Thanks, Mariah. Sorry. This one, yeah. So what we're trying to do is raise enough by the end of fiscal year 26 to have started the process for Forefront to staff up. And then by the end of fiscal year 27, we'll have achieved enough commitments to sustain that and then be also securing commitments that are multi-year and larger for grants that would be made in fiscal years 28 through 30. And then we would have another round of that multi-year grant commitment that would probably be smaller to help folks wind down. So we're ramping up and then reaching a peak time and then ramping back down. And our goal is that then Forefront in particular doesn't necessarily lay off staff when the work is done after Census Day 2030, but we protect our investment in the democracy and civic engagement work in some fashion to make sure we can sustain it over the long term. So that's what we're encouraging funders to think about, is like making that long-term commitment. So democracy work isn't something we do every 10 years for census, but is something we're doing all the time. The total funds here are what Forefront is hoping to raise. Yes. It does not include the state's investment, which would certainly be much larger. How midterms could impact the Bureau, I think that remains to be seen, but certainly a changing power dynamic in Congress would impact legislative attempts to add a citizenship question or other changes that we might be concerned about. And changes that are made legislatively between now and the presidential election. After the presidential election, there won't be a lot of time to make changes to what this Bureau has decided to do by then. Just operationally, by that stage, we're too close to Census Day. So the next year or two is a very critical time to watch for concerning changes to the census form. I see the flag about faith communities. Wonderful, thank you. Yes, we didn't specifically call that out today, but certainly there are folks in the room here because of that, and we anticipate them being actively involved as we go forward. Thank you. The highest priority census tracts for 2030. We'll have to develop that based on updated data and field exercises in the coming months and years. So at this time, we don't have that. Incorporating nonprofit access to legislative guidance. Gabby, I'm not sure I understand your question. If you want to chime in.
Sure, thank you. Hi, I'm Gabe Lyon with Illinois Humanities. I think the slides of like the context in the last census and the context now and what's changed. And one of the things that I think is an additional change is the ways in which nonprofits really need ongoing access to legal counsel about the affirmative action case that happened at the Supreme Court and all of that. And that's just something that when I think about that outreach to all these other nonprofits to help make the count successful, that's just a building block piece that is really different right now.
Yeah, and I'm sorry I said Gabby. I know you're Gabe. I apologize.
Don't worry, Holly.
I don't know what blow brain fart there. But thanks for the good question. So Forefront's actually rolling out now the Nonprofit Resilience Hub, which I don't know if you personally have heard much about yet, Gabe, but for others' awareness, Forefront hired an attorney, Caroline. Is she here? I don't know if she's in the room today. She might be busy. Hello. Feel free to chime in here if you're able to and explain what you're doing on the hub. I don't know if she's in a position to speak, but.
Hello, I am here. I'm
Thank
about to leave for another meeting that starts right now. But just a quick highlight, it's a collaborative program that's providing legal, financial management, and strategic partnership resources and prospect research to nonprofits throughout Illinois with operating budgets under 10 million. And our official launch is happening on Tuesday. So hopefully you won't be able to look at your LinkedIn without seeing information about it. And we have an info session all about the hub that's taking place on Wednesday, and you can register for that. via the Forefront events page. And I do have to hop to this other
Thank
meeting.
you.
So
Yeah, you're good. Appreciate you. Sorry, I totally
No-
put you on the spot. We'll see you
no
soon.
worries.
Lisa shared that event that Caroline just mentioned in chat, so please do join us for that. And that's the partnership also that Charmaine mentioned earlier with Chicago Bar Foundation and Chicago Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights. So there is legal guidance available through that program, Gabe. So just wanted to make sure we're connecting those dots. But we understand it's a difficult time with legal questions, and that's part of why we have the flag on funders thinking about how they can support legal intervention and legal support for the nonprofit community. We are at the end of our scheduled time. I'm happy to stay behind and continue answering questions if folks need that, but we also want to say thank you to our wonderful, wonderful panel and appreciate you. I know you might need to move along with your day, and we're just so grateful for your time and expertise. But if folks want to linger, I'm happy to stay. Thank you so much for coming today. And as we mentioned, you'll be getting all of the resources we shared soon. And Emily, if you'd like to turn off the recording now, you can. Thank you, everybody. Any final questions?
Yes, excuse me. Hi, Holly. Jordan Sorrell here. I had a quick question.